take a stand.
If I'm a Catholic and I'm gay, I'm torn apart. If I genuinely believe, if I'm somebody who actually takes Catholicism seriously, and I'm not an a la carte Catholic who pick and chooses, I'm torn apart. This is not a debate about people who pick and choose about Catholicism. This is a debate about for people whom Catholicism is central to who they are, who they can't reconcile what they are, what their sexual orientation is, and what their most deeply and fundamentally held beliefs are. This is a debate also about the people whose most fundamental belief, which they believe, leads them to be homophobic, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that's what this is about. Three things I want to talk about. I want to talk about the nature of belief. I want to talk about fighting fire with brimstone. This is the dogma versus doctrine question. And then I want to talk about why the Catholic Church, and why particularly the Catholic Church, needs to change it. Before that, 2 points of direct rebuttal. So, Colin gets up here and tells us, well, the problem is over-reliance in Scripture. Over-reliance in Scripture will be created. This is really bad. Well, as we all know from junior state history, the reason we had a split in the Catholic Church, the reason we have Protestants, was because they specifically believed in personal interpretation of Scripture versus priests interpreting Scripture, which is exactly what the Catholic Church does, right? The problem we have at the moment is it's all on one side. There's very little evidence, or at least at best ambiguous evidence, to say that being gay is good. Now priests have this evidence, they can interpret it, they mediate it for their flock. We think it's meaningful in that way, we don't think it's a problem for Catholicism. Then they tell us, well, there'd be a schism. We're quite happy to have a Catholic Church where people can then reconcile their beliefs and for the bigots to leave. We think, actually, as generations will pass, they'll look at the new scriptures that are gospel, they'll interpret them, and they'll come back to the Catholic Church, right? Okay, but the nature of belief. Why is religion so important to people? Because fundamentally, we all wonder, as human beings, where it all came from. And that, what religion does, is it gives us comfort in the meaning of life. It gives us comfort in those long, quiet nights when we worry about what happens after we die. That's why it's so intrinsic to people, right? Why does this make religion exceptionally important? What does this mean for religious belief? That unlike everything else, it can't be mediated in a rational fashion, right? We can see this by the fact that people who genuinely believe in religion go without food. People are being tortured before being willing to renounce their religion. People have died for their religion. People can blow themselves up in the name of religion. That's why we see religion and religious belief is so intrinsic. It's not like anything else. So it's not good enough for the Catholic Church just to turn around and say, sure guys, we made a mistake. We have to change the belief itself because it's free. And the incredible harm that we do is we take people in their teenage years who actually believe this, and we create a crisis of faith in them when they realize that they can't reconcile who they are and their religious belief. And what does this inevitably do? It annihilates their religious belief, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that's something as a Catholic Church we can't consciously be doing because we want to save their souls. No thank you. So fighting fire with brimstone. Like, why is this the best way? Why is this the only way to tackle the problem? Because these guys tell you it's all lies. But more importantly, it's the difference between dogma and doctrine. The reason that priests can't marry is a matter of doctrine, dogma. It was a decision made by a pope back in the 12th century. It has nothing to do with what's written in Scripture. Unlike the position, for instance, of gays, unlike the position of women, when it comes from the Bible itself, when it comes from Christ and his apostles, it's impossible to mediate. The church can't justify repealing it, can't justify changing it, because it comes from a supposedly higher authority, God and his prophets. That's why it's not good enough to turn around and say, just sorry, John. Understand this, right? The Catholic Church has a lot of problems. Does it invent a new document for condoms? Or or transgender people or whatever. No, because those are matters of dogma, not doctrine. They don't come from God, they don't come from the prophets. The reason this can only change this way is because people's belief isn't rational, and it can be only mediated by this message coming from God or Jesus at best, right? You couldn't have no clearer example of the power and the damage that this does than look at the Adam and Eve myth. Look at the way the story of Adam and Eve and women being responsible for original sin has massively harmed and led to the subjugation of women in the Western world, ladies and gentlemen. And this brings me on to the idea of the Catholic Church and why the Catholic Church specifically is important. Because the Catholic Church, unlike any other organisation, has some sort of legitimacy. Because it espouses Christ, because the church is a big church, because it's not associated with craziness like Islam, unfortunately, it's seen as a broker, an institution that has moral authority in the world today. Look at the role, for instance, that Pope John Paul played in mediating and initiating peace conflicts, and a revered figure he was. And so we think it's tremendously important that people can actually buy in and have faith in the Catholic Church in this context. And we think that what we do does that, because you turn around and you create a situation where what happens in Uganda, where people turn to Scripture to justify the atrocities they commit, to justify killing gays en masse, can't be repeated. And that creates a situation where these people have to find other arguments to support their policies. Newsflash, there aren't. The advantage of religion, the reason it's a disruptive force, is because it's a notion and an authority and a belief that is unchallengeable. It comes from a higher source, a higher authority, that's God. We change that, ladies and gentlemen. We make it so now God says everything is okay. So the rationale you come up with now has to be based in reality, has to be grounded in facts. And we don't think there are any facts that can support slaughtering gays in Uganda. We think that's something we should never do, ladies and gentlemen. So we think, the point is that this creates a situation where everyone benefits. Fundamentally though, ladies and gentlemen, this is about people who believe. This is about the nature of belief. And what we're telling you is, belief can't be assessed in the way that we assess other things. Belief is intrinsic to people. Belief gives me existential security if I believe in religion. It means that I don't have to worry about what happens after I die. There's a famous saying, if God didn't exist, man wouldn't create, right? Because we as human beings can't deal with the broader existential question of what happens after life. That's why this belief is irrational. It's not like anything else. And only by changing the source of that belief, only by going to God, only by going to Scripture, only by going to a higher authority, can we solve the problem, can we stop tearing gay Catholics apart, literally, inside. Can we solve the problem of homophobia in the Catholic world, and can we re-legitimize and make more powerful and more great and more in the image of God's splendor, Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church as a moral institution in the world today? There is no choice, ladies and gentlemen. Jesus Christ would have wanted us to do it, so let's do it. Let's propose.